Hello and welcome back. I'm Delilah Reed. Tonight's story is a little different. It's a suspense story. There are secrets in it, and locked doors, and a house that doesn't want to give up what it's hiding. There might be a moment or two that gives you a little shiver. That's all right. You're safe. You're warm. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Nothing in this story can reach you. It's just a story. Carried gently, meant to hold your attention just enough to quiet your mind. And then, like all good stories, it will soften and it will let you rest. So dim the lights. If you haven't already, get comfortable. Let your eyes grow heavy whenever they want to. And when you're ready, let's step into Hollow Creek. Clara Bennett had never heard of Hollow Creek until a lawyer's letter arrived, informing her that a great-aunt she'd never met, a woman named Margaret Whitlock, had left her entire estate to Clara. A house, some land, a modest sum of money, and one strange handwritten line at the bottom of the letter, added by Margaret herself before she passed. "Whatever you find in the attic, Clara, leave it be." Clara had laughed when she read it. She didn't believe in ghost stories. She was 34, practical, recently between jobs and recently between relationships, and a free house in the countryside sounded less like a haunting and more like a very good deal. The drive to Hollow Creek took her 4 hours off the highway, through roads that got narrower and quieter the further she went, until the trees closed in overhead like a tunnel. The town itself was small. One main street, a diner, a church with a crooked steeple. And at the very edge of it, up a gravel path lined with dead sunflowers, stood the house. It was beautiful in a tired sort of way. 3 stories of gray stone and ivy, with tall windows that looked like watching eyes. Clara stood in the driveway for a long moment before she went in, feeling, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, like the house was looking back. The inside of the house smelled like dust and old paper. Margaret had clearly lived simply. Plain furniture, faded curtains, a kitchen frozen in the style of decades ago. Clara spent the evening wandering room to room, cataloging her strange inheritance, half charmed and half unsettled. It was well past midnight when she heard it for the first time. A soft, rhythmic creaking. Footsteps, maybe, coming from directly above her bedroom ceiling. Slow, deliberate, pacing. Clara sat up in the dark, heart thudding, and told herself it was an old house settling. Old houses did that. She almost believed it. Then came the whisper. It was so faint, she nearly convinced herself she'd imagined it. A single word, drifting down through the ceiling like it had been spoken directly into her ear. Evelyn. Clara didn't sleep again that night. She lay very still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around her, until the gray light of morning finally crept through the curtains and made everything feel, if not safe, at least ordinary again. The next morning, Clara walked into town for coffee and found that everyone already knew who she was. "You're Margaret's niece," the woman at the diner counter said, not quite a question. She was older, sharp-eyed, with a name tag that read DOT. "The one from the city." "Great niece," Clara said. "I didn't know her, honestly. I only just found out she existed." Dot's expression flickered, something between pity and caution. "That house been talking to you yet?" Clara laughed, uncertain. "Excuse me?" Dot leaned in over the counter, voice dropping low enough that Clara had to lean in too. "That house has a way of getting loud come nighttime. Margaret used to say it was just the pipes, but my mother always said that house never forgot what happened to that girl." "What girl?" Dot glanced toward the window, toward the church steeple visible down the street, and said only, "Ask at the town archive. Old Mr. Harmon keeps the records. He'll tell you about Evelyn Whitlock, if you ask nice." The name landed on Clara like a stone dropped into still water. Whitlock. Margaret's own maiden name. And the same name she'd heard whispered through her ceiling the night before. That afternoon, Clara found it, a narrow door at the end of the third-floor hallway, painted the same faded gray as the walls, so unassuming she'd nearly missed it twice. It was locked, but the old skeleton key on Margaret's ring fit with a soft, reluctant click. Inside was a child's bedroom, frozen in time. A small bed with a quilt gone yellow with age. A shelf of dolls, dust-coated, arranged with strange care, as though someone had dusted around them rather than over them. And on the small writing desk by the window, a leather journal, its cover cracked with age. Clara knew. She knew this was exactly the room Margaret had warned her about. "Whatever you find in the attic, Clara, leave it be." She opened the journal anyway. The handwriting inside was young, looping, careful. The first page read, "My name is Evelyn. I am 10 years old. Aunt Margaret says I must never go past the tree line after dark, and I never have. But tonight I heard something calling my name from the woods, and it sounded just like Mama." Clara sat down slowly on the edge of the small bed, journal in her lap, and kept reading. The journal told a strange, sad story in a child's plain words. Evelyn had come to live with Margaret at 7 years old, after her mother, Margaret's younger sister, had gone away, though the entries never said where. Evelyn wrote about the house fondly at first, the garden, the dolls, Aunt Margaret's terrible cooking. But slowly, the entries changed. "Aunt Margaret cries at night when she thinks I'm asleep. I heard her say Mama's name. There is a woman in the woods. I've seen her 3 times now, standing at the tree line, just watching the house. She looks like the photograph of Mama on the mantle, except older and sadder. Aunt Margaret says if the woman ever calls my name, I must not answer. She made me promise. I don't understand why, but I promised." The final entry was dated in September, decades ago, and it was shorter than the rest, the handwriting hurried, almost frightened. "She called my name tonight. I didn't mean to answer. I only wanted to see her closer. Aunt Margaret is looking for me. I don't think I'm supposed to write anymore." There were no entries after that. Clara closed the journal, her hands unsteady, and realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room,
that the historical records in town would very likely confirm what she already suspected. Evelyn Whitlock had vanished and never been found.
That night, Clara couldn't bring herself to sleep in her own room. She sat instead in Evelyn's old bedroom, journal beside her, telling herself she only wanted to finish looking through the desk drawers. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the old window panes, and it was easy, too easy, to imagine shapes moving in the dark beyond the glass. She was reaching for the bottom drawer when she heard it. Tap, tap, tap. 3 soft knocks against the window glass, evenly spaced, deliberate. Clara froze, every instinct screaming at her not to look. But slowly, the way you can't help checking under the bed even as a grown adult, she turned toward the window. There was a face there, pale, indistinct in the darkness, framed by wet strands of hair pressed close to the glass. A woman's face. And her mouth was moving, shaping a single word Clara couldn't hear, but could read clearly on her lips. Evelyn. Clara scrambled back so fast she knocked the desk chair over, and by the time she found her footing and looked again, the window held nothing but darkness and her own frightened reflection. She did not sleep at all that night. She sat in the hallway with every light in the house switched on, journal clutched to her chest, waiting for morning. The town archive was a single dusty room above the post office, kept by a stooped gentleman named Mr. Harmon, who'd lived in Hollow Creek his entire 81 years. When Clara asked about Evelyn Whitlock, his face changed the way Dot's had, that same flicker of old grief. "Terrible thing," he said, pulling a thin folder from a cabinet marked by decade. "Little girl went missing from the Whitlock house, must be 40 years back now. Whole town searched the woods for a week. Never found a trace." "What happened to her mother?" Clara asked. "Margaret's sister?" Mr. Harmon went quiet for a long moment, flipping through yellowed newspaper clippings. "Her name was Rosalind. Sad story, that one too. She drowned in the creek behind the house, years before Evelyn ever went missing. Margaret took the girl in after, raised her like her own." Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. So Evelyn's mother was already dead, years before Evelyn disappeared. "That's right." Mr. Harmon looked up at her, and his eyes were kind but troubled. "Which is why folks around here always said it wasn't fit to speak too loud about what the girl claimed she saw at the tree line in the weeks before she vanished. Woman standing in the trees, she told her teacher. Woman that looked just like her mama." He closed the folder gently, as though it might still hurt something inside it. "Some things in Hollow Creek, Miss Bennet, are better left in the ground where they lie." Clara walked back to the house in a daze, Mr. Harmon's words circling her mind. A dead mother, a vanished daughter, a figure at the tree line wearing a dead woman's face. But it was in Margaret's own bedroom, going through a box of old photographs that night, that the true twist revealed itself, the one Clara had never seen coming. Tucked at the very bottom of the box was a birth certificate, brittle with age. not Evelyn's, Clara's own. And beside her mother's name, the woman Clara had always believed was her only parent, who'd raised her alone in the city and rarely spoke of her past, was a hospital stamp from a town Clara had never once heard mentioned in her whole childhood: Hollow Creek. With trembling hands, Clara pulled free the last item at the bottom of the box. An old photograph of a young girl, maybe 10 years old, standing in front of this very house, smiling shyly at the camera. On the back, in Margaret's careful handwriting, were 3 words that changed everything Clara thought she understood about her own life: Evelyn, renamed, safe. Clara sat on the floor of her dead great-aunt's bedroom and understood, all at once, with the sick clarity of a puzzle finally solving itself, that she was not Margaret's great-niece at all. She was Evelyn, the girl in the journal, the girl who vanished from Hollow Creek 40 years ago and was never found because she had never truly been lost. She had been saved, renamed, and sent away to grow up somewhere the woman at the tree line could never follow. The final pages of the story came together slowly, painfully, the way truths do when they've been buried for decades on purpose. Margaret had watched her sister Rosalind's mind unravel in the years before her death. Grief and illness tangled together until Rosalind herself believed the creek behind the house was calling to her, the way it later seemed to call to Evelyn. After Rosalind drowned, Margaret raised the girl herself, and for years, all was well. But then Evelyn began seeing a woman at the tree line, and Margaret, who had lost a sister to that same creek, to that same dark pull, became terrified that grief and history were repeating themselves through her niece. She didn't know if the woman in the woods was real or memory, or something crueler that Clara would never fully understand. But she knew she couldn't lose this child the way she'd lost the last one, so Margaret did the only thing she could think to do. She staged Evelyn's disappearance. She sent the girl away to a distant cousin in the city under a new name with a new birth certificate, and she let all of Hollow Creek believe the worst. Better a vanished girl the town could grieve and eventually forget than a haunted one the woods might someday truly take. Margaret spent the rest of her life alone in that house, carrying the secret, listening some nights to a voice at the window that called a name she'd made sure would never answer again. Clara, Evelyn, sat with the truth long into the night, feeling something inside her ache in a place she hadn't known was empty until it was suddenly, quietly, full. She thought of her mother in the city, the woman who raised her, some cousin of Margaret's, she now realized, sworn to secrecy, who'd loved her fiercely and never once let the truth slip. She thought of Margaret, spending decades alone in this house, protecting a secret that cost her everything, because it was the only way she knew to keep the girl she loved safe. Near dawn, Clara walked out to the tree line behind the house, where the creek ran quiet and slow beneath a pale, waking sky. She didn't know if she expected to see anything there, but she stood at the edge of the trees anyway and said, softly, to whatever might still be listening, I'm safe, Mama. I got to grow up. I'm sorry it cost you so much. I forgive you if you need forgiving. And I forgive Margaret too. The wind moved gently through the branches, and for the first time since she'd arrived in Hollow Creek, the house behind her felt, at last, entirely still. Clara stayed in Hollow Creek. She kept the house, and slowly, gently, she made it her own again. New curtains, fresh paint, sunflowers planted along the gravel path where the dead ones used to be. Some nights, she still hears the old floorboards creak overhead, but it doesn't frighten her anymore. It sounds, if anything, a little bit like being tucked in. Sometimes the truths we're most afraid to find are the ones that we're only ever trying to protect us. And sometimes, the people who love us hardest make choices we don't understand until much later. Choices made out of fear and grief and a love too big to explain in words. If you're still awake, I hope this story held your attention just long enough to quiet your mind and let go of it just gently enough to let you rest.